previous lessons, we talked about all of the events that led up to the Revolutionary War between the British and the American colonies. In today's chapter and lesson, we'll talk about how the American colonists are finally able to turn things around. At the beginning of the Revolutionary War, the differences between us and the British were obvious. As we saw in the movie, the British soldiers are well trained, they're disciplined, they're probably the best army in the world. And our soldiers are mainly militia and volunteers, which means they are not prepared the same way the British are. George Washington moved several thousand American soldiers to New York. He was certain that the British were going to try to take New York from us. If the British could take New York, it would split our power into two pieces and would make us much weaker. British General William Howe and his brother Richard Howe, they arrived on Staten Island in New York Harbor, and Washington was ready for them. He was prepared to defend the city. So what happens now is King George offers one last chance for peace. They say that any crimes against Great Britain would be pardoned. And if you guys remember, a pardon is what we talked about a couple lessons ago, where they forgive you of your crimes, they wipe your record clean. So instead of this, making people happy and encouraging them, it makes us furious. We were ready to talk about peace a long time ago, but that's not the case anymore. General Howe prepares his army for attack, and they're able to defeat us at New York and drive us back. So Nathan Hale was a former teacher, and he proved to be very important for what's going to happen in Boston. So New York is taken over, and it's basically being held hostage by the British. It's being held under siege. Nathan Hale offers to sneak in to try to gain some intel and help George Washington figure out how to get New York back. Unfortunately, he gets caught, and they execute him. They hang him. And the story is that on his way to be hanged, he says, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." And what he's saying there is he's not regretting that he's dying. He's regretting that he couldn't do more and would do it again and again. The Americans get pushed back from New York City, and George Washington realizes he cannot win the battle. Sometimes the smart thing to do is to retreat and run. So George Washington takes his soldiers and he retreats. He does not want to lose the men that he has. Then what happens is Washington leads a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey, December 25th, so on Christmas. It's really possible that the British soldiers were partying, relaxing, having some fun on Christmas, and we decided that's a good time to attack. He guides his troops through the ice-cold snow and the rain, and he's able to defeat the British, and he defeats some people that they hire called the Hessians, which are people from Germany. The British were so wealthy, they could pay other people to fight for them. That's one of their major advantages. They have a huge army, the best weapons, and they are super wealthy. We basically have none of that. Washington and his men march towards Princeton, New Jersey. A week later, we defeat 3 more British groups of soldiers. So after Washington took a couple of losses, these wins are important because it really encourages us and boosts our morale. So things are starting to turn. The British want to isolate New England from the other colonies. The same way they wanted to isolate New York, they want to separate the northeastern colonies. If the British can control New York and keep control of it, they know they can separate us and they'll be able to pick us apart more easily. So General Howe plans a 3-pronged attack. He's going to attack from 3 sides at once. He's going to have John Burgoyne marching from Canada, Barry St. Ledger would attack from the west, and General Howe is going to send reinforcements from the south. So they are planning on surrounding us, and they want to defeat us once and for all. This plan ends up being a complete failure. St. Ledger, he's unable to make it to the rendezvous point, so he's supposed to show there for backup, and he never makes it. General Howe changes his mind and doesn't send the reinforcements. So what happens is only one of these troops of the 3 actually shows up. So instead of having this huge group of 3 different regiments, only one group shows up, and we are ready for them, and we're able to defeat them. And our general, Horatio Gates, takes their surrender. Okay. So when the British hear that they lost this battle, they are shocked. They're starting to think man, maybe we should make some peace. Maybe we should end this while we're ahead. The king's earlier proposal to pardon our crimes did nothing other than make us more upset. The Americans are now demanding independence, and we want to be in charge of our own country. The time for peace is gone, and we're no longer going to be willing to compromise. The British defeat at Saratoga also causes a change in France. We've been asking France for help this whole time, asking them to send ships, asking them for support. But what happens? At first, they don't want to help because they think that we're losing. Once they see that we actually have a chance to win it, the French people decide they will help us. They don't like the British, so they're getting a good deal out of this. They get to get an ally out of us, and they get to maybe defeat the British. So Benjamin Franklin had been asking them for help, asking them for money, asking them for ships, and the French people finally agree, and they're going to lend us some ships and some soldiers. Okay. Almost done. So George Washington gets put in a difficult position. George Washington's soldiers are defeated. They take a couple of losses. They are run down. Many of them haven't been paid in weeks and weeks and weeks. They don't have enough supplies. They don't have warm clothes. And they don't want to be there anymore. So imagine if you have a job and your boss was telling you, let's say you work at McDonald's, and your boss tells you, hey man, I can't pay you this week. Are you going to come back to work? Most people aren't. Imagine that your boss says, hey, I can't pay you and I need you to bring your own supplies and probably going to have to work some overtime. You would never stay for that. George Washington has to convince his men to stay even though they don't have supplies, they don't have money, they don't have everything they need. And this is not a shift at McDonald's. This is something that could get them killed. So he's able to convince his men to stay despite all those challenges. What happens next is General Howe gets called back to Great Britain to explain why he has not won this war yet. We were supposed to be a bunch of farmers with pitchforks. We weren't supposed to be trained soldiers. They thought this was going to be an easy fight, and now it looks like the British are going to lose. So they send a guy named Henry Clinton to replace General Howe. Upon arriving, Henry Clinton finds out that the French are coming, and he evacuates much of his troops. So, the British people are really in a bad situation, and it's looking pretty good for us. The British people want to concentrate their strength in one area. They know that they are on the losing end of this equation now, and if they want to have a chance of beating us, they have to get all of their soldiers together to fight and put up a good offense against us. Washington and his men end up leaving Valley Forge to follow the British army. At the Battle of Monmouth, we almost are able to completely defeat them, and the British end up running and escaping to New York. And Washington keeps that regiment cornered there, so they're basically useless. If they try to step out of New York, Washington's going to go after them. So that group of soldiers is basically quarantined now. Meanwhile, the British are getting desperate, and they are persuading some of the American Indians, the Native Americans, to attack us. Remember, we took a bunch of land from them, so the British don't have to do a whole lot to get them mad at us, to get them to attack. So, in response, the governor of Virginia sends George Rogers Clark into the Ohio Valley to come and stop these raids, to stop the Native Americans, and stop the British from forming this alliance. He marches his soldiers through the wilderness, and he's actually able to capture a couple more British forts and either stop the fights with the Native Americans or figure out a way to squash the conflict that was going on. Okay, guys, so we're going to have a short worksheet on Chapter 6, Lesson 4 and 5. So let's open that up and get it done, and we'll get back to the movie.